Welcome back to Creative Thinkers. My name is Miguel Valenzuela, and as always, we bring you somebody very special. Today we have a writer-performer, and her name is Gris Munoz. Gris, welcome.
Thank you so much, Miguel. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you took the time to talk to us because you're a very fascinating individual. You've done all kinds of stuff, and as the show talks about, we're here to discuss creativity. One of the first questions that I like to ask my guests is, how did you grow up? What kind of thing was going on, the dynamic that was happening in your life in order for you to become who you are today?
Oh, well, thank you so much for that question. So I'm a poet and performer, and essentially a writer. Essentially a writer at the core, and a trained poet, classically trained poet, I guess. And I've been writing poetry since I was about maybe 7 years old. I remember writing my first poem. And so I'm Lower Valley born and raised, and I'm first generation. I come from, two parents that were very traditional, raised Mexican family. I'm the youngest of 4. I have 3 big brothers, and I was very much a creative child.
What kinds of things did you do? Did you draw on walls, maybe? Did you write on everything?
I was a reader. I have always just understood the written word very well. I mean, I have memories of being, 3 years old and holding up the newspaper, pretending to read, and then my mother, has a bookshelf, and even before I started writing, I remember that I got into all her books and I signed them.
Did you really? So you're already getting ready.
I signed all her books in the cover page, in the title page. I signed them like if I was already a writer. And when I fell into school, I just was a reader. I mean, I remember being in first grade, and the librarian, I had burned through all the kindergarten books.
Oh my gosh.
And the librarian saying, you can go ahead, and all the other kids
levels
are just here, but you can get whatever you want. And so I did. And so that very much was my identity as a child, a reader. And my dad would drop me off at Pavo Real Library all summer.
And you would just read
and I would
read.
I would stay at the library all day. I would get there in the morning and go get a big stack of books, novels, and I'd read 2 or 3.
Jeez.
And then he would pick me up after work, and you just think, those were the days. Those were such different times. I have a 14-year-old. I'm not so sure that I'd be comfortable dropping my
That's very true too.
teen off, at anywhere now, but and this is without a cell phone. This is without, but I was a good kid. And so I did that, and at some point in elementary school, I began to act. And I began to act. I was always the one that got the lead in the musical or in the play, and I pretty much just kind of grew up that way.
And did your parents kind of push you into these things? Were they very open? Because I know that one of the most important things is to have a really kind of type of family that is really pushing the arts, because arts are very important. Were they that way, or were they more like, if that's what you like, mija, then go for it?
Always
supportive, obviously.
I like to think that, I come from first generation. These are working class parents. My mom, she worked in factory jobs while I was little, and my dad was a professional, and but essentially they were busy. I think they were very busy, and I think overall I had just so much time to myself. It could be seen as different ways. Maybe there have been times where I felt like I didn't get enough attention as a child because my parents were busy. They're first generation. They're working. We're surviving in a lot of ways. And so I wasn't really fostered by my parents artistically, but I will say that my dad Mr. Antonio Munoz. My dad just always, he got it. He always went out of his way. I remember every summer, every school district is going to offer like the writing camp.
Right.
I was
Some kind
at
of summer activity.
some kind of summer writing
Right.
camp. That was me. I was at every summer writing camp, and my dad, he'd find a way to drop me off and pick me up.
So even as a young child, they knew that it was about writing for you. How
Yes.
did you get into acting then?
I'm assuming it was like being in plays in elementary school, and then in high school, I was a freshman at Del Valle High School, and I auditioned for the school musical. And this was a production called Cabaret, which is a very adult musical for them to have as a high school, But
And you're all, I'm in?
I was in, and I was a freshman, and I auditioned, and I got the lead.
Nice.
And so I had to sing and dance on
As a
stage
freshman?
as a freshman.
Wow.
So I mean, I've just always been a performer, and really any kind of performance, any kind of stage. In high school, I was also, I was just bored. I think I was bored, but there was a pageant. There was a Miss Del Valle pageant, and I won that.
So you've always been the type that's wanted to have some sort of attention given to you in some way, and also at the same time, then you are able to communicate things to people,
Well,
right?
I mean, I like to think that I was just good at it. I mean, I felt comfortable. I felt a certain confidence performing. And even as so I graduate or in high school, I'm still performing. I'm still a nerdy kid. I'm in speech and debate. I'm performing like monologues. So I was in extracurricular activities, theater, choir. I was just like a nerdy kid. Love performance. But there was definitely a chasm that happened to me because
This was right at the end of high school?
this is right at the end of high school because it was interesting because I really, as much as I had done and as much as I had accomplished as a kid, as a teen, as a high school writer, performer, I even remember 4th grade, I won first place district YISD, the writing contest. You know how they have that district-wide writing contest, and in the year I won 3rd place. So I mean, I was definitely close to what my destiny was supposed to be as a kid. And then, but there's that. They always say, what is it, nature versus nurture, right? And so, nurture for me was completely different. Again, these are working class families.
Right.
This is, and I think that ultimately, as much as my parents did think that I was talented, or I just don't think that they could have ever imagined me really being an independent woman.
Why is that? Because I think that's one of the things that you comment even in your book, how there is kind of an imbalance that is created amongst males and females. And I know that some of the poems that you've written in the book are geared towards those ideas.
Yes.
Can you give us an example? Well, let me show the book first of all.
So,
title is Coatlicue.
Coatlicue girl.
If I said that correctly. So there's actually a kind of a dynamic that's happening between the two words here. So explain to us, maybe one of the stories and what exactly Coatlicue means.
Oh, absolutely. So, to answer the prior question, being the youngest and seeing, 3 big brothers, and my brothers had so much freedom. Right, my brothers had tons of freedom. Not only that, but they were teenagers when I was a little girl. So I'm seeing that, right? But my brothers had a lot of freedom, and I very much saw that, I did not have the same freedom as my brothers, or it wasn't, my parents definitely were, more, there were more rules for me, and,
You said you were the youngest.
I was the youngest, and, but at the same time, it became very apparent, and I think it was actually just told to me explicitly. My mom, at some point, I was a senior and I was talking about how all my friends were applying to college, and she said, "You're not going anywhere."
You were told this.
She said, "You're not going anywhere. You can't go anywhere. You have to stay here because you're the only daughter and you're the youngest, and you can't leave until you get married. Like, you can't leave your parents' house until you get married." Now, that is a very
That's like a stigma, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very old type of just mentality, right? You know, Mexican patriarchal, right?
Society.
Type of thinking.
Right.
And so, you know, she said, you know, you're not doing that. You're gonna stay here. And
so did something change at that point
absolutely.
in your head? Was
I mean,
that like a wake-up call for you to kind of start making changes in some way?
No. Like what I say is que me cortaron las alas. Like they
tú
cut my wings.
necesitabas tus alas.
I remember going, what? You know, suddenly the world became so much smaller upon being told that. And so, you know, I was told, you know, when you graduate, you're going to get a job and work full time. And if you're going to go to school, you're going to do it at night, you know, you're going to, and oh man. And I just listened. I actually just listened. So when I graduated, I did rebel for a while. I definitely was not writing, not performing. It was almost like if that part of me had it was gone, I guess.
That was part of them clipping your wings?
I would say so. I mean,
Wow.
I'm wondering what exactly happened, but it was like I was very, very active in what and ultimately, you know, what I do now in high school. And then early on, you know, 18, 19, 20, 21, I got a job. And so I actually, I learned a lot. I was a teacher's aide in special education for SISD. And I worked as a paraprofessional, taking kids off the bus in the morning and feeding, you know, special education children. And I did that for almost 5 years.
Wow.
And I loved it. I loved my job. You know, I was very grateful.
I'm sure it was a huge learning experience.
You know,
as well,
it really
you know?
was. I matured and
Right.
but it was like I felt this. You know, I would drive to work and I would just cry.
Wow.
I used to listen.
Did you have at that point when you're sitting in your car crying have emotions that are connected to this book?
Oh, absolutely. So in the book, there's actually short stories where I discuss all these times, right?
Really?
And so my book, the book is called Cuatlicue Girl. And
Yeah,
it's
maybe you can read something to us because
a-
I know that there's a lot of beautiful poems in there.
It's a collection of short stories and poetry in Spanish and English. And essentially, it tells the story of my life. Growing up here on the border, and all the stories are true for the most part, except for the last one because it's like a science fiction type of story.
Right.
But so it covers a lot. So going into the name Cuatlicue Girl, so Cuatlicue is the, you know, the word Aztec is a little bit, but like let's say Nahua is more the proper culture
That's
name.
the language, right?
It's a language, or the Nahuatl would be the language, and Nahua is kind of like the culture, the people.
The culture, okay.
And so Cuatlicue is la diosa de las diosas,
Right.
the mother of all the goddesses, right? There's Tonantzin, there's Xochiquetzal, there's, you know, in the pantheon of let's say Aztec
Right.
deities, even though even the word deities is a little, see them more as like essences of
Right.
nature that take on different manifestations.
Correct.
So
And you talk about that as
so
well.
I talk
in
about
the
that
book?
as well. And so Cuatlicue is the mother, right?
Right.
The mother of everything. And she's also like the earth. She represents the earth. She represents mothers and anything that is like creation. Right?
Creation.
So just creation.
The matriarchy
The
of
matriarchy,
everything.
all that.
Right.
And so the book is called Cuatlicue Girl because it basically tells the story of me as a child. There's poems and there's short stories of me as a little girl talking about my childhood, and I'm growing up. There's me as a teen, as a rebellious, wild teen.
Right. Going into Mexico.
Going into Mexico,
assume,
so
right?
we
Yeah,
talk
'cause
about,
I remember those
and
days.
we talk about how I talk about how we used to do that, right?
Right.
And that's a culture that we've talked about as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the most interesting things is how these are things that we don't do anymore. So it's almost like you have now documented this
Yes.
for time.
Oh, and absolutely.
And it's good for us to read things like that because we can see how things have changed as well.
Absolutely. All of our pictures from those times in Juarez, those are documentations, personal histories.
Absolutely.
And those are absolutely memories that, we will not have again, especially, not in that way. Not in that way.
Yeah, because times have changed.
Times have changed, and
Absolutely.
it was just before the decades of narco violence that has ravaged the borderland, ravaged Juarez. And so I write about that. I write about being a little girl, being a teen, being a young woman that is kind of lost, because what ended up happening was, once my parents told me, hey, you're not going anywhere, I fell into brain drain, right? What they,
Right.
and also like another term for what they say, brain drain. I was just telling you that I heard this term recently called the culture of no expectation.
Right. We talked about that. Give us a little bit of background on that,
So
because that's kind of hard to grasp.
Yeah,
for
no,
our
culture of
viewers.
no expectation is actually a term that came out of, like, let's say, inner city urban areas, like Black students. And so it's basically, just how it sounds. Nobody really has any great expectations for you. You're expected to.
So is that society saying there are no expectations for you, or is the individual also involved in that?
Well, I
would speculate that the individual has to be involved to some degree.
I would say so, but I think that I just didn't know.
Right.
It was just, I've always been, I like to say that I'm very rebellious, but at that moment I was very obedient when my parents said, no, you're not going.
So it took you a little bit to
Yeah,
kind
so
of say,
I listened.
do I need to do that?
I listened.
Do I need to stay here?
I got the job. I got the job at the school. My dad knew somebody, and he got me a job as a teacher's aide, and I did that. Up until the age of about 23, like maybe 19 to 23, almost 5 years. I did that, and I like I said, I loved it very much, but I started. There was like the edges were fraying. It was like I was starting to see all my friends graduate from college. This was around the time, everyone's 22, 23. My friends are graduating from college, and they're embarking on their lives, and I'm not doing anything. I'm really not doing anything that makes me passionate, and it was interesting because I knew that, because I remember I used to drive to work and I'd cry, and I would just I just didn't know how I was. It seemed. I remember I used to go to Barnes and Noble a lot, and there was a book there, a very famous book. It's called "What Color Is Your Umbrella?"
I think I've heard of that.
And it's basically to pick a career, or And I remember that I bought that book and I went through it and I filled it out, and I kept getting writer.
Oh, really? So even when you were a child, you were a writer. Then you took a test, you were a writer.
It said writer. And then I remember going, what job is that? Because I was stuck
it really
in
doesn't
that.
exist.
I was stuck in
You
that
have to make
first
that job.
generation mentality, right? Because you think about how typically when migrant families come into the U.S., that first generation, they work really, really hard. And they always talk about how our parents, our grandparents that came over, they sacrificed so much of their dreams for their children.
Right.
And so that's essentially what had happened to me. I was just really grateful to my parents. I was trying to be obedient, but at the same time I was miserable. and I didn't know how to get out of it, and I didn't know what to do. I was, and this is kind of like where there's a lot of magic involved. There's a lot of excitement involved, because when you think you know everything, you leave no room for surprises.
Right.
And so.
But I think the surprises are always there. You may think you know everything.
This is true.
But little by little, all these things just come up, and you're like, wow, you're in awe and amazed at what's happening at the moment. And I feel like that's what happened with your book.
I left. I told the school I was leaving. I quit my job. They loved me. They said, you can always come back.
Not knowing at that point what you're going to do.
No, completely just. And but I knew I wanted to go to school. I was like, that's it. I'm going to enroll in school.
Right.
And I talked to my parents, and they were like, my dad said, like, yeah, I think, I don't know if they just didn't maybe know that it had been that important to me. But I finally said, I got to do this. I have to go back to school. I have to go back to school.
And how important was school for you? Because obviously this show is for EPCC. And one of the things that we do here is we educate.
Yeah.
How important was it for you to actually go and get educated? And what were the things that changed at that point?
It wasn't just going to school. It was actually EPCC that led to me having
doing
everything, like
things.
all of it. It was EPCC. I truly believe that. I registered at EPCC. I started taking a few classes. And lo and behold, I took a theater class with none other than Hector Serrano, the very famed director of Viva El Paso,
Right.
and as a theater. And I had these poems. I started writing poems. They were just coming out of me, but I only had like 2 poems. That's another story. Maybe I can tell you later.
Right.
But I only had 2 poems, and I was so excited about these poems. I would read them, and I felt like I was like alive. I would shake. I don't know how to explain it. I'd feel this almost like a heat. I don't know. I was just
like something coming over
like
you.
this, yeah, like a I don't know. And
Right.
I showed them to Hector Serrano, and I remember that he said, "Wow, this stuff is great. This is great. This is beautiful. This is incredible Chicano poetry."
Is that where it clicked?
And I didn't even know what Chicano was.
Right.
Like I was like, Chicano poetry. And he said, "You know what? This is great. You know what we should do? I'm about to put on a performance, a play of Luis Valdez, very famed Chicano playwright, Luis Valdez. And at that time, Hector Serrano was putting on a production of a play called Bernabé for EPCC. And he said, why don't you open up my play
With your poems.
And recite them?
How awesome is that?
I thought, oh my God,
Like you had just grown your wings back?
Yeah, I was like, it was like I had never, it was so exciting for me. I remember thinking, I would love to. And I'm starting to get so excited, and then so I'm getting closer to the play, and then I think, well, what am I going to wear? Because it's a theater production.
Right,
How am I? And so this was a Luis Valdez play, and so I dressed like a pachuca.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
I went out, and I had a like a pachuca hat, a fedora type hat, and but always very very I don't know, my own style.
Right.
Let's say my own style, very feminine, very sensual, always my own style. And so I came out and I performed my poems, and it was incredible because as soon as I did that, I was back in a way. It was like, this was me. And then I finished doing that, and someone else says, hey, aren't you that girl that did the poetry at this place?
Oh, people start recognizing
Why don't you come do it over here? Or stuff like that. Like that's kind of, why don't you come
lovely.
to this open mic night that we're doing? And so suddenly the city and the world started opening up for me.
It embraced you completely.
And that's kind of like how it all began. And it's funny because at that time, it was almost at the exact same time, someone told me, hey, have you heard? There's going to be a poetry slam. It's a big slam. At that time, it was a festival called Rascuache. They never had it again. Like
Only
they
that one
literally,
time?
it was, if you remember what was it called? It was like a downtown funding group. They were called the Something Zone or.
No, I don't remember
I don't
that.
know, but either way, it was funded by this group that, they never did this thing again, but they brought HBO's deaf poets
Oh, really?
to come and judge this slam.
No way.
So all the nerds, right, all the local poets were all
Went.
fired up about this, and everybody was talking about it. And I said, well, what do you need? Well, what do I need to do this? And someone told me, well, you need at least 3 poems.
So you had to write one more.
Yeah, because I only had 2.
Right.
And so they said, you need 3 poems because if you make it to the 3rd round, it's a slam. But see, here's the thing. I had always performed.
Right.
I had done it.
So you had this already.
I had done it since I was.
Like 1,000 times.
So, yeah. And so even though I appeared as an ingenue, I
It
wasn't.
was something that was already running in
I
your
had
blood.
already done it.
Right. So
And
if
so-
somebody, sorry to interrupt you, we always run really short on time, but if somebody wants to start doing something like this, do you have any advice for the viewers? Maybe for the chicanas out there, the young girls out there, young gentlemen out
Yeah, no,
there.
absolutely. And I always say this, you do not ask anybody for permission. Never. If you ask somebody for permission, you know what they're going to do?
They'll probably cut your
They're
wings.
going to say no.
Yeah.
And so I remember, that morning of the poetry slam, telling my mom, and of course I wore a costume because
Right.
I loved wearing a costume to perform. And I told my Mom, yo voy a ganar. I was at the table with her. And she goes, ay, mija, esas personas son profesionales, mija. Ellos son profesionales. Tú ve y like try your
Haz lo mejor que
hardest,
puedas.
and
Yeah.
and I was sitting there and I was like feeling this, and I had written the 3rd poem that morning. Like
But
I
you
got
did it.
up, I
But
got
you
up
did
and
it.
I finished the poem. It was a Dia de los Muertos poem, and I told my mom, yo voy a ganar. She goes, ay, mija,
But you did. You won.
I won.
See,
I
so it's
won.
always important to have people believe in themselves.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no. There was, and at some point you come off as arrogant almost.
Yeah,
People go,
but
what is
there's-
up with this mujer?
Yeah.
She thinks that honestly, it's
that
because
she can do it, but I think it's important for people to know that they can do it as well.
absolutely, and so many times you're your only cheerleader. You're the only one. No one else could possibly envision what you're capable of. And so I remember that I came home and I put the money down on the table and I said, yo gané.
That's awesome.
And she was like, I realized that I wanted so hard to prove. But my mother, she also grew up with a culture of no expectation.
Yeah.
And she wasn't trying to
But
hurt
that's
me,
something that absolutely has to change.
Oh,
So if somebody
absolutely.
wants to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you? Do you have an Instagram or a Facebook?
I do. I have a website at www.grismunoz.
Cool.
And this is so cool. I get to tell my origin story. And I have a Facebook at Gris Munoz, and you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. And so, that was, and all this story, I'm telling my origin story, that was about 20 years ago.
Yeah. And I
And,
wish we
you know,
had a ton
no,
more
absolutely.
time to give
And,
to
since-
give to you so we could keep talking about all this.
Since then, I've just had a very illustrious career. This book is now being translated into Italian,
Beautiful.
German, and Spanish.
Beautiful. And it's just going to keep going.
And it's just going.
Well, Gris, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out and telling us such a beautiful story, because it's very important for the viewers to hear who these people are, who our guests are. So thank you very much.
Hi, thank you so much, Miguel.
Absolutely, it was our pleasure. And I wanted to thank all of our audience and viewers out there for coming and joining us for this interview and talking to or listening to Gris. If you guys want to get a hold of me, you guys can reach me at mvalen31@epcc.edu, and you guys can watch us at EPCC TV/Creativity. creative thinkers. Thank you very much, you guys. We'll see you guys next time.